welcome to Dmexco 2019 here in Cologne. I have a pleasure of speaking with a lot of interesting people, and I always ask them the same question first. Who are you and what do you do?
Yes, hello, my name is Marc Speichert. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at GSK Consumer Healthcare. I joined GSK 2.5 years ago from Google, and before that I was in various marketing roles at Colgate and L'Oreal.
Great. I think it's really interesting because I think the healthcare sector and digital, if you get them right and combine them correctly, there isn't any other sector where there's so much opportunity to change how people live, how they interact, and how their health develops. So I think you're definitely in the right space. But my first question goes towards your title as CDO. So the Chief Digital Officer has the responsibility to go out and hopefully digitalize the company more. But to me, the biggest threat with that position always is, to me, digitalization should be a horizontal function. So just because there's a CDO, the finance guy can't say, oh no, digitalization is not for me, and the sales guy and the purchasing guy, and everybody cannot say, no, digitalization, please go to him. So you're in a vertical function with a horizontal task of digitalizing the entire company, not just a small chunk of it. What's your perspective on that? Is that something you faced in the beginning, that people were kind of pointing at you for digital and were taking it slow by themselves?
Yeah, so maybe let me just take a little bit of a step back to explain why I chose to go to GSK to begin with. So when I was at Google, I got a call from the CEO at the time to tell me, like, we're really serious about digital transformation and I want to make sure I get the right support from a Google perspective. So can you put a GSK team together at Google to help us in our transformation? So that was my first kind of foray into the healthcare industry and GSK specifically, and I was incredibly excited about the space and the opportunity. And so as the CDO role was created, I felt like an incredible opportunity to go back into the client side and really drive that transformation equipped with my Google knowledge. When I first started, I was part of the marketing organization, so it was really much a CDO helping transform marketing in the digital world, and so we took many different functions from very different places within GSK. It was obvious when I was at Google that I had many different marketing stakeholders, from procurement, media, PR, content folks, and I was like, the opportunity was to bring all those pieces together. So we created a team of insights analytics, media, content, digital innovation, marketing excellence, and we brought all of this under the umbrella of my scope, right? And so for the last 2.5 years, that's been pretty much my focus. So it was very much marketing centric. So I would say probably 90% of my time was the digitalization of marketing and 10% was more enterprise focused. As we went through the joint venture with Pfizer, so we're integrating the consumer business of Pfizer with GSK, we're going through a major kind of rethink in terms of how we accelerate things and use this integration as an accelerator. And as such, we're like, how do we pivot the role to really be much more enterprise focused, to your point, right? And so right now we believe that digital is very, very powerful in transforming what we call front, middle, and back functions. Front being the commercial functions, middle being supply chain and manufacturing, and then back functions being HR or finance, for example. And so we have three functions that we decided to prioritize for now. Obviously continuing to do some of the work that we initiated in the commercial side, specifically marketing, but also very importantly R&D, and how we accelerate through digitalization our R&D and innovation agenda. So that's the second area. And then the third area is supply chain manufacturing, where through the lens of what we call digital data analytics at the core, we think can really transform how we do things in that particular space of the function.
Really cool. So you kind of sliced and diced your focus, and you have a clear focus area for digitalization. And in preparation for this interview, I looked at some other interviews you gave before, and you said a CDO, when you go and digitalize, you got to have the fundamentals right. Is that something through the merger you described, to setting up and creating the focus areas you're looking at, getting the fundamentals right? Is that still something you're looking at, or would you say, okay, that process of 2 years helped me to get the fundamentals right, now I'm off to greener fields, or where is the status of the transformation you're going through? Yeah,
no, it's a great question. I think a lot of the fundamentals were focused, as I said, on the marketing side of things, right? So if I look at the core areas that we pushed, was first on the media side, there were lots of opportunity in that particular space when you think about just pivoting our media dollars to be much more digitally heavy, which we had a huge opportunity to drive in some of the big markets like in the US or China, where for the most part, spending more money on digital than we are on traditional offline. So that was just a fundamental that we needed to put in place. Making the right ad tech choices was another opportunity. We made a deal with Google on a direct ad tech relationship, which we felt was a great way to kind of establish and clean up our DSP ecosystem, which was quite complex. Made some big changes on the agency side, just simplify our agency ecosystem, and decided to make a big deal with Publicis, setting up kind of a data ecosystem through People Cloud, which they're custom building for us. So that was on the media side, so lots of kind of building the pipes and making sure the fundamentals were established. The second area was around digital commerce. I think, again, like just making sure infrastructure-wise we made the right choices. We have a big partnership with Clavis that helps us kind of monitor how we show up from a digital shelf perspective and have a very consistent view of that performance across markets. We pivoted quite significantly in terms of where we put e-retail and media in some of the key markets. So China is a massive market for us. A brand like Sensodyne is 30% of that business is sold through e-commerce already, and Unlock was making sure we're pivoting some of those media dollars to be e-retailer specific. And then the third area was around content and how do we reinvent content in the digital world and creativity in the digital world. Kind of revamping our marketing excellence program, making sure we are, again, also building infrastructure that supports that, digital asset management tools, making sure we're thinking about dynamic creative in a much more organized way versus what had done before. So I think that's what we've done on the marketing side. So that's lots of fundamentals, lots of infrastructure, and just the results have been exciting. If you think about it, like we were kind of middle of the pack, bottom of the pack when you look at digital IQ. We work with a company called L2, which gives you an enterprise digital IQ that looks at various different levers. In the US, we're now kind of top of the pack, which we're excited about. Still lots to do, but it's starting to pay off. And so trying to move away from the shiny syndrome object and trying to do the cool stuff that gets you on top of the cover of Ad Age to really making sure we're fixing the stuff that actually really delivers and really sets us up for success, I think is paying off.
One interesting question for me is when you talk about fundamentals and what you described, I think makes perfect sense, but it definitely has a technology layer, right? You talked about finding the right vendors, setting up the right technology, having the infrastructure that allows me to digitalize my company. But I think the second, even more important layer is then the people who go and manipulate the technology, who use it, who deal with it. And we had another great discussion interview, and a CEO once said to me, Niels, my task is to digitalize the company with the people that I have, not to do a greenfield and hire entirely new people. When you look at the work you did, I think, what would you say, what percentage was kind of training, development, working with the people you have? How many new hires did you have to do? If you would split it, was it kind of 50-50 thing? Was it 70 training, 30 new hires? How did you change the organization to embrace digital and to digitalize itself?
Yeah, I think for the most part, we looked at probably, I would say, like a 50-50 mix, and we're still going through some changes as we speak. If I go back, I like your question on the technology front, because we try to borrow a lot from the tech world in terms of how we even rethink the tech organization specifically, right? And I think in the past we had a very business partnering type of tech functions, right? That would be almost kind of an in-between the tech vendor and then the business stakeholders, to an organization that becomes much more able to kind of roll up their sleeves and get into the tech, right? So that was a fundamental shift, and one of the things that we've been trying to drive pretty aggressively is agile and kind of borrowing from the software kind of development space and applying that to how we develop products and create, data product owners, for example, or just product owners more broadly. And so that's been a pretty massive shift in terms of the tech organization specifically. And we're bringing that over to the other functions of the organization. So I overlook data in my current role, so making sure we have data product owners that interact with the product teams in the tech organization is becoming very important, and these are completely new roles that didn't exist in the organization. So in that particular instance, we just have to hire roles because none of those folks kind of existed, and the skill set is quite different versus what we had in the past. Okay,
so technology is kind of a race car, but you need to make sure people can drive it within your organization and develop it further. One aspect around healthcare that always comes to, we discussed it previously before, always comes to bear is that people really focus around regulation. And coming from Google, a company that, yes, there is some regulation, but what they did was so new that regulation constantly plays catch up, whereas in the healthcare industry there's already so much regulation written, done, and dusted that sometimes you feel, well, I can't digitalize this asset, I can't move the company because there's just too much regulation. How do you deal with that topic?
What we try to do is kind of identify some opportunities where we can just push the envelope in regards to experimentation and doing things differently. So within GSK we have lots of brands, very big brands, and then we have smaller or mid-sized brands, and so we decided to actually use some smaller brands to really kind of pressure test how we can challenge the process and some of the standard operating procedures that GSK had, right? So we used a brand called Biotine, for example, which is a relatively small business for us. It's an oral care product for dry mouth sufferers. So if you're on heavy medication, this product kind of helps you and does wonders. The challenge is we never really rethought kind of the opportunity to bring that product to market in a very unique way. And so we created what we call a digital garage, and so we put that brand through the digital garage in a true kind of performance marketing agile way with daily stand-ups and just putting a SWAT team in place that worked with the local team to really kind of rethink how we go to market, right? And so that was an amazing way for us to kind of rethink how we do marketing in a different way, and then we brought that experiment to the US and scaled that through the US, right? So that for me was a good way to create a bit of a sandbox, because if we thought about things like copy approval, which sometimes can be very heavy, in this particular instance, we've agreed with our legal folks and our compliant folks to say, let's create a sandbox. You know, the risk is limited because, again, this is a small brand in a small market. So, you know, the risk exposure is quite limited. So let us help push the envelope. And so we were able to do that and create that sandbox and then kind of bring that back to the rest of the organization, which was a great output in terms of what the project brought.
So sandbox, and I think you then created success, and it was easier to replicate it because people were seeing, instead of seeing all the regulation or seeing all the problems, they were seeing something successfully being done in terms of bringing a product to market. Is that something that how it worked? Or?
Exactly.
Great. Cool. Well, look, I think that's a very positive ending in terms of explaining how digitalization can enhance a company. At the end, I'm asking each of the people I get to speak to why digital transformation failed so often. I know it's a negative question, but I think in my mind there are a lot of more examples why digitalization is not being implemented, why companies are not transforming, why they don't have a structure that allows them to innovate and go through it. Why do you think that is? What's your experience with projects that failed?
You know, when I was at Google, I was looking after consumer packaged goods and tech, and so I saw lots of different companies and their approach to their transformation, and I like to kind of categorize leadership in 3 buckets. You know, the ones that don't see a burning platform and don't think it's an agenda that they want to push, right? Then you have the people who clearly see the burning platform and are committed, and then you have kind of the people in the middle, right? And so kind of trying to be very clear in terms of how you identify kind of the stakeholders and where they fit in that segmentation, and then how do you adjust kind of your tactics according to that, I think is something that you have to be very cognizant on, and just not having a cookie cutter approach regardless of who you interact with. And in every company, I think you have people that fit in the 3 areas, and so you just have to be more customized in terms of how you bring the agenda forward, right? I think that's been my experience back from my Google world that I'm trying to bring also now to my GSK experience. Okay,
great. So it starts with leadership and the acceptance of digital transformation. Thank you very much for taking the time to have a discussion with us here at Dmexco 2019 Cologne.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.